Hello and welcome. In this video, I'll discuss some additional questions that students frequently ask about the F1 student visa interview. Now, if you haven't watched my earlier two videos on how to prepare for the F1 student visa interview part 1 and part 2, then I would strongly encourage you to do so because most of the questions that a visa officer could ask you have already been discussed in those videos. A link to both those videos are mentioned in the description of this video. In this video, I'll discuss some additional questions that students commonly ask and those which I kind of missed out in my earlier videos. In the description of this video, I have also mentioned a list of all questions that I'll be discussing in this video and the timelines associated with those. So in case you're looking for an answer to a particular question, you could directly go to the timeline associated with that question and you'll find the answer there. Does the university that you plan on joining affect your chances of getting a visa? Well, yes, to a certain extent, the university that you plan on joining does have an influence on the visa officer's decision on whether or not to grant you a visa. It is generally observed that students who intend to go to a really high ranked or a well reputed university not only get asked fewer questions during the visa interview, but the visa acceptance rate in such cases is also very high. Whereas students who intend to go to a low ranked university or a not so reputed university get asked more questions during the visa interview, and the rejection rate is also comparatively higher. Now, it does not mean that just because you intend to go to a low ranked university, your visa will definitely get rejected. It just means that you should be prepared to face more questions about why you want to go to this particular university, why do you want to do a master's from this particular university, and so on. So if you can answer the visa officer's questions with confidence and you are well prepared to face the visa interview, you will still get your visa accepted. It's just that you should be prepared to face more questions during the visa interview. Sometimes students ask that I have a bad academic record during my bachelor's and my test scores are also really low. Will that negatively affect my chances of getting a visa? Well, yes. If your academic record during your bachelor's is very weak and your test scores are also really low, there are higher chances that your visa might get rejected. Visa officers, especially when you are going to really low ranked universities, might try to get into details of your past academic records. That is, they could ask you questions about your GPA during your bachelor's, the number of backlogs that you had, and they could also ask you about your GRE, TOEFL, or IELTS scores. And if they feel that your past academic record is really weak and your test scores are also really low, there is a higher chance that your visa might get rejected. Now, as I mentioned in my earlier video as well, visa officers are looking at students who are genuinely interested in academics. That is, they want students who have really done their research about the master's program that they plan on applying to, and they want students who are serious about their education. And a bad academic record in the past and low test scores indicates lack of seriousness about academics. And that is the reason why there is a higher chance that your visa might get rejected. But if you can still convince the visa officer that you are now genuinely interested in your master's and that you have done your research about the master's program that you plan on joining as well as the university that you plan on joining, there is a possibility that you might still get your visas approved. So it doesn't mean that just because you have a bad academic record, your visa will definitely get rejected. But yes, students with low academic records have a higher chance of visas getting rejected than compared to students with very good academic records. Students ask that if I have an admit from only one university, will this cause a problem during the visa interview? Well, no, having an admit from one university will not cause any problems during the visa interview, so don't worry about it. Sometimes students have this doubt that if there is a long gap of 2 or more years from the time I've completed my bachelor's till the time I begin my master's, will this increase my chances of my visa getting rejected? Well, yes, if there is a long gap of 2 or more years from the time you graduated from your bachelor's and by the time you begin your master's, and by gap I mean an unemployment gap. That is, you have been doing almost nothing from the time you completed your bachelor's till the time you begin your master's, then that would definitely be considered as a weakness in your profile. Again, it doesn't mean that just because there is one weakness in your profile, your visa will definitely get rejected. If the other aspects of your profile are strong enough, and if asked if you can justify the reason for this gap, then it should not be a problem. But if you have no justification for this gap and the rest of your profile is also very weak, then there are higher chances that your visa might get rejected. Some students apply for their masters after gaining 5 to 6 years of experience and often have this doubt that since I'm applying for my masters after gaining significant years of experience, will that result in my visa getting rejected? Well, no. Just because you have 5, 6, or even more years of experience does not mean that your visa will get rejected on those grounds. I have seen students who have applied with 10, 12, or even 15 years of experience and have been granted their visas. Now, as long as you can justify your reasons for pursuing your masters and tell the visa officer on why you feel that this is the right point for you to pursue a masters and how this masters fits in with your future career plans, everything should be fine. So don't have to worry that just because you have higher number of years of experience, that could be a problem during your visa interview. That will definitely not be a reason for your visa rejection. For some students, the masters in the US could be their second masters. That is, they already have a master's degree from India or maybe some other country. Such students often have a doubt on whether applying for a second master's will increase their chances of getting their visas rejected. Well, again, no. Just because you already have a master's degree does not mean that your visa will get rejected because you're going in for your second master's. If you can again justify to the visa officer on why have you decided to pursue a second master's and what complementary or supplementary skills the second master's would actually add to your profile and how it would help you in your career, your visa should definitely get approved. Students who are changing fields, that is, students who have done their bachelor's in one subject and are now applying for their master's in a completely different domain, often have this doubt that since I'm changing fields from one subject to another, will that result in my visa getting rejected? Well, no, just because you're changing field does not mean that your visa will get rejected. As long as you can explain to the visa officer the reason for this change and what has been your motivation behind pursuing your master's in a completely different domain and how this master's degree would actually help you both in terms of gaining new skills as well as your future career, you should be fine. So just because you're changing field will not result in your visas getting rejected. Students who have a sibling, that is a brother or a sister, who is either working or studying in the US, often get really nervous about this fact and wonder what questions would a visa officer ask them about the sibling. Now, let me clarify that having a sibling, that is a brother or sister, or for that matter, even a spouse or a parent in the US, is not going to affect the visa officer's decision on whether or not to grant you a visa. Having a sibling or any other relative in the US is absolutely fine. You don't need to worry about it. So, first of all, I would strongly recommend that don't hide such facts. Because if you hide a fact that you have a sibling or a parent or a spouse in the US, now that could negatively affect your visa chances in case you get caught. But as long as your brother, sister, maybe a spouse, husband, wife, or even a parent is in the US, they are working, studying, or whatever is their status, and as long as they are on legal status, you have really nothing to worry about it. So if the visa officer asks you about your maybe your sibling or your wife or husband or parent, whoever is in the US, tell the visa officer whatever is the true status of your sibling or your relative. Don't try to hide anything. If they are studying, tell them what are they studying, which university college are they studying. If they are working, tell them which company or what has been their designation. That is all you need to know. So the most important thing is don't be nervous about it. Having a sibling or any other relative in the US is not a crime that you should be worried about. And be honest in telling the visa officer what does your sibling or your relative in the US does. Students repeatedly ask, how much funds should I show during the visa interview? Now, as I discussed in my earlier video, that is in part 2 of the video on how to prepare for the US F1 student visa interview, visa officers are not going to get into the details of your finances. That is, they are not going to do an accounting based calculation wherein, say, if you show an X amount of money, they would grant you the visa. And if you show anything less, they would reject your visa. Visa officers are going to ask you questions to only assess your overall financial capabilities and to understand what is going to be your plan for paying for your masters. I know that my answer sounds a little vague, but that is how the situation is exactly. Now, if you have to prepare yourself to answer questions related to finances during the visa interview, I would ask you two questions. The first is, do you know what is going to be the exact and the actual cost of your education? And not the one that is mentioned on your I-20 or 1.5 times or 2 times the I-20, but what is it going to cost to actually during your entire masters, both in terms of tuition as well as your living cost? And second, do you have the funds to pay for it? That is, do you know where the money is going to exactly come from? That is, whether it's going to come from a loan, how much of it is going to come from a loan, how much of it is coming from your own savings or parents or whatever it is. So if your answer to both these questions, that is, do you know the exact cost of your education and do you know where the money is going to come from, is an yes, then I think you should be confident enough to face the visa interview. So as far as preparation for the visa interview goes, it's not about how much funds should you show to the visa officer or how much funds should you show during the visa interview. You should ask the question, am I prepared to answer any questions related to finances? And that will come only when you are confident, you yourself are confident that yes, I have the funds to pay for my future education. Another commonly asked question by students is whether an affidavit of support is required from my parents or my sponsors. Well, no, an affidavit of support is absolutely not required. Visa officers are not going to ask or check any such documents. So don't waste your time and money preparing an affidavit of support or any such document. Sometimes students ask, what if the visa officer asks me, why are you taking an education loan when your parents can afford to pay for your education? Well, if the visa officer does ask you that, you could tell the visa officer that as an adult, I do not want to burden my parents with the entire responsibility of my education, and hence I have availed an education loan. Although my parents could pay for my education, I would like to take responsibility of my own education myself, and that is exactly the reason why we decided to go in for an education loan. Also, taking an education loan would give my parents additional liquidity. That is, they could use their funds for other investments or any kind of emergencies in case they arise, and not block their funds for my education. That is exactly the reason why I have decided to avail an education loan, although my parents are willing and can pay for my entire education. Students whose parents are retired often fear that if I tell the visa officer that my parents are retired, will that cause any problems with my visa? Well, no, telling the visa officer that your parents are retired will absolutely cause no problems for your visa. So don't worry about it. All your fears, if any, are completely baseless. Just because your parents are retired or they are working or whatever is their situation is not going to be the reason for your visa rejection. If your parents are retired, that is absolutely fine. As long as you know exactly where the money for your education is going to come from, you are absolutely good to go as far as the visa is concerned. Students often ask, can I show property during the visa interview? That is, can I tell the visa officer about the property, land, or any other real estate that me or my parents own, especially while answering questions related to finances? That is, if asked, how do you plan to pay for your education? Can I tell the visa officer that we intend to sell a property which is worth so and so rupees, and whatever money we get from the sale of it would be used to fund my education? Well, I would strongly recommend against doing that. Visa officers are somehow not convinced when you tell them that your funding for education is going to come from a sale of property. And that is mostly because sale of properties are not always guaranteed and sometimes it may not happen on time. So telling the visa officer that I would be paying for my education through the sale of a property may not sound a very convincing answer. So even if you get your property valuated, it would not help because the visa officer is not going to get into the details of your property or check any of these documents. So I would not recommend telling the visa officer that the funding for my education is going to come from a sale of a property. And hence I would not recommend getting property valuations either. It will not help your case and it will only cost you extra time and money. Is there a dress code that you need to follow during the visa interview? Students often ask this question as well. Well, there is no specific dress code that you need to follow. I would not recommend dressing too formally, that is, not wearing suits and ties or blazers or that kind of a formal attire. I would not even recommend being very casual, that is, no round neck t shirts or maybe shorts or that casual and attire. You can wear jeans if that is what you are comfortable in, or any form of business casuals are absolutely okay.